Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and we're now showing you a live picture, this of Capitol Hill, where President H.W. Bush's body continues to lie in state as mourners file in to pay their respects to the 41st President of the United States. Thousands of people continue to enter the Capitol Rotunda to say their final goodbyes. Now, earlier this afternoon, the President and Mrs. Trump, they visited with former President George W. Bush and his wife Laura and offered his condolences in person. The current president will not speak at any of the memorials, no word on what the president said during their conversation. At the Capitol, a particularly moving moment came when former Senator Bob Dole, a one-time primary opponent of George H.W. Bush in a presidential bid, he was helped out of his wheelchair so he could get closer to the casket and give a salute. Both military men, both serving in World War II, obviously a major physical challenge, but Senator Dole thought it was the right thing to do and the proper respect to be paid. The president's body will stay in the Capitol till tomorrow morning. Then it'll be moved to the National Cathedral for the state funeral, which begins at 11 a.m. On Wednesday afternoon, his body will be flown to Texas, and it will lie in repose at St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston. Then the funeral service will take place Thursday morning at 11. The former commander-in-chief will then be buried at the Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas. Of course, we will be covering everything live as it happens over the next few days as the nation says goodbye to George Herbert Walker Bush. Now I want to pivot to one of many huge stories and developments this week, the latest developments in the Russia probe. Now we're waiting for the release of a court filing that will show details of Michael Flynn's cooperation agreement with prosecutors. Trump's former national security advisor pleaded guilty to lying to investigators a year ago. These documents expected to provide a lot of details into the probe, possible ties to Russia, and who knew what and when. And since Flynn was involved in the campaign before working for the administration, he was there during pivotal times that Mueller is examining. Plus, two Trump tweets are getting a lot of attention today. I'm going to read them to you again tonight. And again, these are the president's own words via Twitter. Michael Cohen asked judge for no prison time. He lied for this outcome and should, in my opinion, serve a full and complete sentence. I will never testify against Trump. This statement was recently made by Roger Stone, essentially stating that he will not be forced by a rogue and out-of-control prosecutor to make up lies and stories about President Trump. Nice to know that some people still have guts. Again, every word I read from the President of the United States. Now, the former Solicitor General of the United States says there are lines that have been crossed here. Take a listen.
What we saw today is the President engaging in something that looks very much like witness tampering. And this isn't witness tampering in any ordinary law enforcement investigation. This is witness tampering by the President of the United States.
Pretty direct. Well, joining us now, as always, to help us try and make sense out of this, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel. Roland, we are waiting. Obviously, we have not gotten the actual document from the Mueller office for the sentencing memo for Michael Flynn. Explain the significance of when it is released, what kind of a tell it will give you in terms of not just Flynn's cooperation, but also the methodology and the strategy that Mueller's going to be imposing.
Well, I think we can expect that the memo, to the extent it is filed in open court and without redactions, and it's possible that some of it will be under seal and will not be visible to members of the public. But to the extent we can see things in the memo, I think it's very likely we're going to hear what Flynn had to tell Mueller about the whole process of working with Trump through the time of the campaign, right up to the time of the inaugural, who he told about his contacts with Russia. And there were many, of course, in December of 2016. He was seated at dinner next to Vladimir Putin, and presumably he's now told Mueller about what passed between the two of them. So the potential for a real mushroom cloud type bombshell out of this report and memorandum is significant. But of course, we're all just speculating until we see it. in print.
And again, there's a deadline of midnight tonight. A lot of us thought it would have already been dropped before then, but again, they have still a little under 6 hours to comply with that stated deadline. A question. Clearly, the president has been on edge the last few weeks. Coincidentally or not, Mr. Whitaker has taken over as acting attorney general. Would he be privy to the cooperation that Mr. Flynn would have done, or will he learn like the rest of us?
If he has not recused himself from the Mueller supervision of the Mueller probe, and we have no reason to think that he has, he would have access to all of Mr. Mueller's files if he wanted it or asked for them. So it is entirely possible that he knows a great deal about what Mr. Flynn's cooperation has been. He may not have asked for it, but it seems likely he would know at least the general outlines of Mr. Flynn's cooperation. And the fact, indeed, that Mr. Whitaker probably does know a good deal about what Mr. Mueller knows may explain why he is not standing in the way of the Mueller probe and is not acting as the kind of brake on the Mueller team that Mr. Trump no doubt hoped he would.
Another player in this, Roger Stone, he has now announced he's pleading the Fifth and will not be testifying before the Senate. What do you make of that?
It sounds like the standard playbook for anybody who wants to avoid perjury. I think that Roger Stone is playing this like a hard-nosed subject of criminal investigation. I think he'd be foolish to testify before the Senate. I think if he were my client, I would be counseling him to take the Fifth Amendment and refuse to testify, because testifying is almost certainly going to harm him in some way. It'll either give the Senate and Mr. Mueller leads to further evidence that they haven't figured out yet, or some of it could be provably false, in which case there'd be a perjury count to be brought. So Mr. Stone's doing the right thing, in my opinion.
You saw both the tweets from the president directly about Michael Cohen and what he thinks of his cooperation, and also what he said about the aforementioned Mr. Stone, that he had guts, that he wasn't being party to it. The former Solicitor General, we just played the soundbite, says this is witness tampering, and this is witness tampering by the President of the United States. Do you think he's right?
You know, it's pretty close. Mr. Catal is a brilliant man, and I've followed a lot of his commentary with great interest. He's a very bright person and very insightful. This does sure sound like an attempt to manipulate these witnesses by signaling to Mr. Stone that a pardon might be out there for him if he stays strong. You know, it is at least right up to the line. I don't know if we can say this is really witness tampering, because we don't know that there has been a pardon offered to Mr. Stone, but it is wildly inappropriate for Mr. Trump to say something like this, and it would be wildly inappropriate and wrong for any subject of a criminal probe of any kind to be making statements like this about the witnesses. Indeed, Mr. Trump is basically generating evidence against himself by doing that. What does an average juror think when they see something like this put before them? They think that he is trying to influence their view of Michael Cohen and Roger Stone. There's only one reason to do that: because you're guilty.
And by the way, just from a layperson's perspective, it sounds like a mob boss threatening witnesses to cooperate with the feds. In the end, this is the judiciary branch of the United States government here, and the idea that you would comply with the, and participate in a criminal probe, somehow that makes you a rat. I'm waiting for Sonny the Bull Gravano here to pop out. I mean, it's surreal. I think we're so close to this. Given a little window of history, it's going to even look more bizarre. Now, a couple state attorney generals today, they've announced that on their own tracks, they're going to get involved, including subpoenaing records and also getting tax returns. it feels like the walls are closing in here on a lot of different paths, all at the end of the day trying to follow the money trail of the president.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the president is really like that old character out of the Peanuts comic strip with the dirt cloud that follows him around. Everything he touches turns out to be dirty in some way. And, his financial relationships to the hotel and everything else, the way he's stayed in business. Jimmy Carter sold his peanut farm. Donald Trump can't let go of anything that generates cash. And the Constitution has very specific prohibitions against this, which he seems to be in violation of every day. So this stuff is just going to be a nightmare once it's finally examined. And, I predict he will turn out to be the pig pen of the U.S. presidency before it's all over.
In terms of it being over, there are reports that Mueller's close to wrapping this up. We've talked before, Roland, you and I, the significance of getting those written answers. It seemed to almost serve as a catapult, that he was waiting for those, and right after it, then you saw a host of the developments that we've talked about, kind of disproving some of the written statements the president gave. I'm asking you to first guess this right now. You believe that we're not going to get to the new year before we will have learned, in effect, what is in the Mueller's final report, and you think it's going to have to do mostly with Russia and money?
Yes, I think a large part of the report will be devoted to that, because that is going to require a great deal more discussion and detail to suss out. The issue of obstruction of justice, be it the firing of Comey or any other of the president's acts, he seems to be willing to obstruct justice right out in the open. It just doesn't seem that there's the degree of subtlety there or the degree of detail that you'll need to know to make that decision. I do think, as I've said before, I don't think Mr. Mueller is going to end his probe until we know the outcome of what I suspect is his subpoena to Mr. Trump for his testimony. I think that issue will have to be resolved in the judicial system before Mr. Mueller lays down his sword.
Well, before the clock strikes midnight tonight, and maybe even sooner this hour, we're going to see at least the first major tell, and that being the actual memo here, the sentencing memo from Mueller and team regarding Mr. Flynn, and I think we're going to learn a lot from that. Roland, as always, my friend, thank you for the time.
Yes, and Richard, I'll be staying up late tonight to take a look at that report.
I
look
am
forward
sure
to
you will.
to you,
Absolutely.
To you about it soon.
You got it.
Okay.
All right, when we come back, there was more developments on the Hill, this time with palpable anger and confusion over the killing of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And this isn't from Democrats. Republican senators livid at the White House for continuing to question our own CIA's assessment, saying the Saudi Crown Prince ordered it. Also, a briefing by the CIA director today just made them even madder.